in Lean and Kanban. I'm a regular conference speaker, so it's a really great opportunity for us and for you to have direct access to him. It's not just about today, he's also going to be here in New Zealand in a couple of weeks, and you should have some course details on your screens now. There are still spaces available on both dates, but time's running out, so sign up soon. Now today's going to be a little different to the previous two webinars. If you attended those, we thought we'd open up the floor a bit so you can ask your Lean and Kanban questions to Al. We have a number of questions that have been pre-submitted, so we'll start with those. But if you have a question in mind, feel free to type it into the question box at any point and we'll ask it for you. For those of you that are in Wellington, we'll aim to keep this to about 45 minutes so that you can go out and see the 7th parade, 12:45.
So, Al, can you hear us?
Yes, I hear you fine. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you. You're good to go? So, Al, the first question is around trends in the Lean Agile space, and we just got a question around the future trends that you see and what we need to start thinking about today to be successful tomorrow.
Well, I think the biggest trend we're seeing is that as Agile has become successful, how do we apply it at larger organizations and at mission-critical organizations, and how do we get better planning? So I think what we're seeing is we need more than, we need a bit more than just the how do I get a team to work? And this is where I think a lot of Lean comes in, is that it's important to be able to have more of an holistic view. So I think there's getting to be much more interest in how to get a bigger picture. And that's Lean. Kanban actually adds some better rules to things to understand how to manage better. And you're even starting to see things like the Scaled Agile framework, which I'm not really sure is how widespread that is down in your part of the world, but it's basically a framework based on Lean and Kanban at the high level, but it allows Scrum implementations and Kanban implementations at a lower level. So that's another thing we're starting to see.
That leads quite well into the next question, actually, which is we're interested in how you in the US are seeing the uptake of Lean and Agile development practices. Are they mainstream now, or more traditional iterative and waterfall projects still pretty common over there?
Well, I think actually it's getting to be broader, but it's not mainstream. Scrum still seems to be the big flavor. When people say let's go Agile, more and more people think we need to start with Scrum. You know, Scrum started out here, and you have the Scrum Alliance and the Scrum Org, which are kind of big. But I think people are starting to realize that Scrum is good at the team level, not at the enterprise level. So people are turning more to Kanban and turning more to Lean. Where I find Kanban has taken off the most, not sure why, but seems to be the case, is in Scandinavia and Northern Europe. So that's the place that I would say is leading Kanban and Lean implementations. I think the United States will eventually get there as a whole, but this has actually been one of my personal things, is that I really believe that I really think that it's very important to get this broader following of Lean and Kanban, because we've learned so much over the last 15 years about how to do Agile. It's kind of silly not to take advantage of that, and I think people are finally getting there. But you know, there's always a lot of hype in anything new, so the industry's been slower to change than I would personally like to see, but that's just the way it is. I think you're slowly seeing Scrum evolve through actually learning lessons from Lean and Kanban. So I think that's going to accelerate. But that's where I would look. I mean, so when I talk about Lean and Kanban, I don't think you need to abandon your efforts on what you're doing. I just think you can learn from the Lean and Kanban practices and improve what you're doing.
So it's kind of like taking the next step from Scrum or the flavor of existing Agile.
Exactly. In fact, I wrote a blog a few weeks ago saying get the Scrum of 2017 now. And the reason I said that is we've been doing Scrum for like, I don't know, since we started in '99. and we've been doing Lean since about 2003, 2004, and Kanban now, I guess, for about 5 or 6 years. And what we found is that practices, because we had a Lean mindset and focused more on workflow and how things should be looked at from a holistic view, we were taking a lot of those ideas and putting them into our Scrum practices. And what I noticed was that typically things we were doing, like, in 2004 started happening in the industry in 2009. We were ahead of the game, you could say, by 5 years. And it wasn't just us. I mean, anybody who was doing Lean or anybody who was doing Kanban was also a few years ahead. So I'm suggesting that you want to take these advanced things. It doesn't mean you have to abandon the ideas that are in Scrum, but you got to take on the Lean mindset of looking at your workflow, knowing that if you overburden people, they're going to get less done, knowing you need to create visibility, you have to manage your work in progress. If you still want to do iterations and things like that, that's not a problem. But I would say there's some science now we're starting to get the software. Like, I go way back. I started programming in 1970, and I remember in the 70s, software was like, I won't say it was an art back then, but there was definitely not an agreement on what good software was, and there was definitely an awful lot of individual skill, and you tried to figure things out, and everything was new. And then after about 10 years, it got into the 80s and 90s, definitely by the mid-90s, there was a huge understanding with object orientation and design patterns what to do. And now software development on the technical side, even though it's not done well widespread, it's actually known what people should be doing. And I think process has finally caught up. So I think Lean and Kanban is teaching us what we need to be looking at. And regardless of the methods you're doing, you can learn lessons from those. You can learn lessons from Lean and Kanban and apply it to any part of what you're doing. So that's one thing I also like. It doesn't require a particular structure. It's more of a mindset shift than anything else.
You mentioned that Scrum works well at a team level, but not so much at enterprise level. Did I get that right?
Yeah, I mean, some people dispute this, but I don't know. I've been working with large-scale adoptions now for almost 10 years. And Scrum, look, the definition of Scrum is you've got a development team that's cross-functional. You've got a product owner to tell them what to do. You've got a Scrum Master to act as a facilitator and a coach and a liaison to the rest of the organization so they're not interrupted. And the whole notion is you have this cross-functional team that works well, and the way you scale is you do a Scrum of Scrums, basically make team of teams. But the problem is the psychology of a local team is a lot different than the psychology of like an organization made of teams, because you're always more concerned with your own, the people you work with on a day-to-day basis. So our experience of Scrum of Scrums works well for communication, but it doesn't work very well for decision making. In fact, I'm doing a talk on it tomorrow. You can check it out on our website called 3 Ways to Scale Agile and the One That Doesn't Work Well. And the one that doesn't work well is Scrum of Scrums. A team of teams is not the same as an holistic view. It's not the same as a big picture. And Lean provides that. So I think this perspective of saying we want self-organizing, empowered teams where people figure out how to do their work, but it has to fit within a bigger structure, a bigger vision of what you're trying to accomplish. Now, if all you have is 58-person teams and everybody's independent of each other, then Scrum works just fine. But I have never seen that. There are always interdependencies. There are always one team affects another team in some way. In large companies, you have different parts of the business, and if there are technical dependencies, there are business dependencies. And the myth that you can have independent teams is just that. It's a myth. Even if your architecture is great, there are other things that are affecting you. And the fact that a team will be as concerned about another team halfway across the world more so than their own team members is just not true. I mean, we're very tribal in nature. We care about ourselves more than we care about ourselves and our family more than we care about other people. And you say, well, that's selfish, and it's human being. That's natural. That's human nature. So you have to recognize that if you have a groups of people that have different motivations and different ways of being evaluated, you better have a way of creating a big picture so everybody understands their role in the big picture. And then you have some potential of working together. Lean provides this. Lean takes this holistic systems thinking view that says what we're really trying to do is deliver business value in an incremental way. The fact that we're doing development iterations is incidental. And I shouldn't be attacking, I'm not attacking Scrum or saying Scrum is unique. On the Kanban dev group, as a matter of fact, this morning, somebody said, how do I talk to my high-level management about Kanban? I've got a 10-minute presentation. And I said, don't talk to them about Kanban. They don't care about Kanban. They want to know how they're going to get the most important thing done in the shortest amount of time. Talk to them about that. Talk to them about how they're going to get the business value delivered faster so they can start taking advantage of it. You know, the thing that's kind of forgotten, if you can deliver something in 3 months instead of 4 months, you get an extra month's revenue. It's not just you're going to get more delivered, you're getting revenue sooner. Business folks like to hear that type of talk. Then you could talk about how if you manage your work in progress, so you're working on the right number of things, you're more efficient, you don't waste the capability you have or the capacity you have by switching from one thing to another and creating extra work. And then you can mention that Kanban gives you that way of managing it, but they don't really care. It's like, I don't care what the engine in my car is like, I just want to know it accelerates. I want to know it has good gas mileage. I know it'll shut off when I'm not moving, things like that. But I want to know really what's the car doing. And business folks want to know where's the business value. That's what they're interested in. Kanban helps us. Lean helps us with that. That's what you want to talk about. And that's, I think, where things are shifting. How do we deliver business value more quickly, not how do we have a two-week iteration more effectively?
You mentioned a couple of times there that Lean provides the holistic view. Can you give some concrete examples of what sort of activities or practices do that?
Yeah, well, I would suggest 3 things about Lean that do this. First of all, Lean is based on a systems thinking approach. By that I mean it's a recognition that the system people are in has a very large impact on the people. This does not mean that people are cookie cutter and you could put people in or out of a good system. It does not mean anything like that at all. What it means is if you put good people in a bad system, you're going to get bad results. It means you have to have a good system. You have to have them operating in a good way, and that they're the ones who probably have to build it because they know their job best. So good systems and respecting people are cornerstone. Now there's another aspect of Lean. The other aspect of Lean is that if you have delays in your workflow, and this is interesting. See, most companies, they manage themselves through some hierarchy. Imagine I've got my president or CEO at the top, and then he has reports, and then, you know this inverted tree structure we see in hierarchies. And we talk about how, we have our direct reports, and they have their direct reports, and most organizations are managing the people. Well, you don't want to be managing the people. On the other hand, you don't want to let just the people do whatever they want because that's kind of chaotic. But imagine what happens as a piece of work comes in, and there's this thing we call the value stream or the workflow. Something comes in and it goes from one group to another group to another group to another group. This workflow is something that cuts across the organization and is rarely managed in organizations. Instead, what happens is we manage it by seeing when people can work on the project. So now we're managing the allocation of people instead of actually managing the workflow itself. So what happens is you think, well, I got these people, they can get the job done, but you allocate people to projects, and whether they're working or not isn't being managed, just the number of people you think you need. So if you were to follow the work itself, you'll see that it starts, and then it stops, and then it starts, and it stops, because an analyst might work on one project, but then they're needed on another project, so they go work on that, and the first project just kind of stops there. Lean says that you manage your workflow. You cut out all the delays, because when work is sitting there, it actually creates additional work. It doesn't just sit there. Like if it's a requirement and it just sits there, it's aging. It's not going to be as good in another month. Or if it's a piece of code and there's a bug in it, a week later it's going to be hard to fix that bug. So imagine what you're doing is you're trying to move 2 different piles of stuff, and as long as you're moving it, the stuff you're moving isn't getting any bigger. But if once you start moving it and you let it sit there, it just grows on its own. That's what software is like. So the second piece, besides systems and respecting people, is you want to manage the delays in the workflow. And the way you do that, and this is the cornerstone of Lean in my mind, or not the cornerstone, but this is one of the key principles, is that if you're working on too many things, if you're working beyond your capacity, then you are necessarily causing these delays that necessarily will cause you to do wasted work like refining, rebuilding requirements, things like that. So Lean is this bigger picture. It says look at the workflow, focus on the workflow from the start of the project until it's consumed by the customer. And by looking on the workflow, it gives you a method of managing things. And this is very critical. This is a lot different than saying let's get a team together so they can work in a very efficient way, which is a good idea, but what you're doing before it hits the team, what you're doing after it hits the team isn't there. If you've got a project that has multiple teams, how do you manage those multiple teams? The idea that people are smart and they'll figure it out is ridiculous. Yes, people are smart. Figure it out. I mean, that's what we have universities for. I mean, you know, people go to universities to learn lessons learned from past generations. Software is a bit different. Our past generation was 5 years ago. So we're relearning things all the time. We want to take advantage of that knowledge, and Lean provides this model of understanding to do that. Just saying a team will figure it out and then collaborate. I mean, I shouldn't have an attitude about it. I admit I do. I know I have energy on it. I should be more patient. But I see so many organizations pushing against the wall looking for a door, and people are telling them, no, 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 you can figure it out. And I don't like that. I like this bigger picture view. Take advantage of the Lean science. Take advantage of what we know about delays. And the good news is you don't trust. I don't want you to trust me. You can look at your own experience. And I invite all the listeners out there, look at your own experience and see where delays in the workflow, like a developer had to wait for an analyst, or an analyst has to wait for a stakeholder, or a developer had to wait for a tester, and see where that literally created additional work. That's what I'm talking about. That's what we have to manage and remove.
Just expanding that kind of question in a slightly different direction, have you experienced a situation where a team is trying to work in a lean or agile manner, or even an iterative manner, but for a client who is much more waterfall-minded by default, and the two would appear not to work too well together? Is there anything in Lean that can help smooth this relationship?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's not just when you're working with a customer, but what if you have vendors that are very waterfall? So instead of talking about waterfall, let's actually, waterfall is kind of funny because it's often talked about as a predictive model and heavy process and all that, but there are two characteristics. There are two characteristics of waterfall that to me are the most salient. One is waterfall is very often big batches of work. In other words, you figure out everything you're going to do and then you start working on it. So if it's a 6-month project, it's not just that it's a 6-month project, but you don't start working on, say, the design until after you've got all the requirements. So you have all of the 6-month project in play at one time. So there's a lot of work going on. It's very hard to manage that. The other thing is there's this notion of predictability in waterfall, that you can predict what you're going to need. There's almost no acknowledgement that the discovery is possible. Now, both of these are problematic assumptions because the larger batch, the harder it is to get feedback and build things well, and obviously we know we can't predict things too well. So what you want to do is shift the conversation from waterfall as this thing to what's really happening, which is that I've got big batches of work that I haven't figured out if they're valid or not. So if you've got a customer, what you want to talk to them is, you got to ask, why are they talking waterfall? What they want is certainty, really. And they think if they pretend, or they think you should be able to predict how long something is going to take, then they think they're getting their certainty, so they're comfortable. So what you really want to talk to them about is, let's look at how delays, again, affect us. And how do we decide what to do? And how do we do risk mitigation? Well, if you build something that you didn't really need, that's risky. It's risky for a lot of reasons. First of all, you wasted that effort, but more importantly, you now have more complex software doing something you don't need because it's bigger than you need. So what you want to do when you talk to customers is, don't talk about waterfall or Kanban or Agile. Again, talk about what's something meaningful to them. How do you mitigate risk? how do we know for a fact this is the right thing to build? What if we build a certain amount of it and then we validate that it's good? Or how do we know that you need all of it up front? I mean, maybe it's a 6-month project, but could you get half the value in 3 months? Well, what if we give you half the value in 3 months? You'll be making money in half the time. And then if you want, we'll continue. We'll give you the rest of the value in 3 months. So you need to educate them on this. Now, if they don't want to be educated, or if you're working with a vendor that they're just working the way they are, or if you're working with part of your own organization that's kind of slow, mainframe, database, sometimes they're kind of slower to pick up on the Agile mindset, then what you want to notice is the time that their interactions are causing you, the time delays they're causing you, are going to cause you extra work. Well, make that visible. When you can show people the cause of their actions, when you can show people the what's in it for them, so to speak, they will improve. So part of this is an education. It's not just how do I work with them, but how do I demonstrate that the way they're forcing me to work is actually causing problems. Even then you can do things. I'll give you an example. This was with a very large IT company. I don't remember exactly how big, something like 2,500, 3,000 people we did years ago. This was not our first large scale, but at the time it had been our largest one. And we were doing Scrum in those days, but we were using Lean to some extent to guide us a bit. And there was a challenge with the Scrum teams working where they had to interact with the mainframe teams, which typically was like if you wanted them to do something, you needed to give them like I don't know what it was, like a 6-week or 12-week lead time or something like that. So what we did when we built stories, we knew that time was there. We knew the last thing we wanted to do was to get our stuff done and then make the request to them and then have to wait 6 weeks, because all that would do is add more delay and add more work. So on our cards, we just noticed, look, you need a 6-week advance notice to these people. We attended to the delays, and then we managed our projects based on the known delay, knowing that, well, we couldn't get it down to 2 weeks, which would be nice, but if they had a 6-week response, we would at least manage to that and make sure it wasn't any worse. So what you want to do is first create visibility, see what your delays are, have there be educate people that large batches and large delays increase risk, and then that's how you can improve. So you accept and manage it as best you can. You be as agile as possible. See, there's no such thing really as agile per se. It's how agile can you be. So if you have a constraining customer, constraining vendor, or even a constraining internal team, well, with that constraint, how agile can you be? Not do I have to do 1 or 2 or 3 week iterations. That's just a things. Did I answer that? I kind of went off on a lot of things there.
You answered it for me.
Okay, very good.
Okay, we've got a few questions, quite specific ones around Kanban boards now. So we've got, in Kanban, what's the best way to determine the work in progress limit for a column, given that you might have a situation where different teams of different sizes might work on the same board at the same time?
Okay, so I don't know that I would be having different teams running on the same Kanban board at the same time. First of all, I'm not sure what the reason for that would be, but even if it's the same team, you do have different sizes of things, and I know that can cause problems. So I think I'll get the question answered, but typically if I had 2 teams that were working together, I would still have them have their own swim lanes per se. You could put the boards on top of each other. But one thing is to note that, first of all, Kanban board is a reflection of your work, of your workflow. And it's not necessarily meant to be precise. But if you have like half-day jobs up there or one-day jobs and 2-week jobs, that can be a bit of a problem, there's no question. But one thing to be clear about is what we're talking about is the whole piece of work. So when you use a Kanban board, you don't have tasks run across the board. You have pieces of work that are complete in and of themselves. That doesn't mean you can release it, but it's something that should be able to go through the discovery, the design, development, and the delivery, test and delivery phase. And in this case, our own experience is you never really want these pieces of work to be more than 2 or 3 days anyway in length. Now, a lot of people claim you can't do that. Oh, I've got this really difficult technical problem. Like, I'll give you one of our worst cases of a client we worked with. Not the client was worst case. I mean, the problem was worst case. They were a great client. They were writing a one of these disaster. No, it was a. Sorry, they were doing that too. But the case I'm thinking of in particular was they were working on one of these. I got one machine, but it's I've got virtual machines in it. Very complicated, very complex. And yet, if you break stories down right, we could break it down into 1 or 2 week pieces of code that could be written and validated by having very specific test cases. So first of all, the size of the things running across your board should be about between a half a day to no more than 3 days, certainly not more than a week. That cuts some of the variation down. Now, if you have some level like that, that's probably good enough. Yeah, if you had 10 half days, that's going to be different than 10 3 days. But that typically doesn't happen. If it does happen, then you could weight. If you could weight things by how many stories you have or story points or whatever you're doing, and instead of the number of pieces you could do some weighting factor. Now, some people suggest in Kanban estimation is waste and things like that, and I'm not quite sure where this comes from. I have 2 theories. One theory is that most people in the Scrum community use planning poker to estimate stories, and in my opinion, planning poker is one of the most inefficient methods of doing estimation. I vastly prefer Steve Bachman's relative estimation, or Grenning's. It's also called planning poker, but when people hear planning poker, they typically think of Mike Cohn's planning poker. Grenning's planning poker is a lot different. So first of all, you should be using estimation. It shouldn't take you very long. If it is, and you're using Cohn's planning poker, look on our website or just Google Bachman relative estimation or Grenning planning poker. You'll come up with some alternative methods. I think the other reason is people say, well, if I'm estimating, I'm not adding value because I'm not writing code. And I'm saying, well, you may be adding value because you may be doing risk mitigation. This whole thing about eliminating waste, Lean is not about eliminating waste. I know people say it is about eliminating waste. It's about removing delays which cause waste. Getting into the conversation of this is waste or that's waste, you ask me that conversation is waste. It's misleading. So you want some level of estimation, and then if you have different sizes, you could do just a weighted thing, right? Like how many story points or how many points. And it's not just the work at the column. In fact, I'm going to go into this in depth in these Kanban simulations we do, because there's a lot of question about how do you manage your workflow. Do I managing my WIP in the column? Is it the column before? Is it when it's ready? It gets very confusing. But if you think about why are you managing work in progress in the first place? See, it's not this magic number. It's why am I doing it? Well, is it just to limit how much work? Yes, but how do I use it? WIP limits, work in progress limits, are there as a decision point, as a way to decide what to work on next. So if I have a column that says I'm working on 5 things here, and the column before it is a ready to work on it, then those are the same thing as far as I'm concerned. In other words, if I got 5 things and 10 things waiting, or if I've got 5 things waiting and 10 things being worked on, I got 15 things that those people have to do. It's the same thing to me. So this is why you'll see on a lot of Kanban boards that the WIP limits show the work and the ready for the work in front of it, and the reason it's because you're considering how much work is there, what you're going to do. So it's like there's different ways to do it. Actually, I think I might have said that a little wrong, but you use the WIP limit to determine what the next action is. So if code is looking to do work, if they can see that test has got all this work waiting for them, they don't want to pick up some more code for them to write, so the testers will have even more stuff to do. It just doesn't make sense. This is kind of hard to talk about without pictures, so I'm not sure that was all that clear. It's something we'll talk about more. Like when we do the simulations, that's something we'll be talking about there.
Okay, no, that's great, thanks. And I think you managed to answer at least 3 out of the 4 questions I've got on Kanban boards in that part, so that's good. There is just one other one I'll go over, and that's about buffer columns on boards. Just wondered what your thoughts on those were, the poser of this question feels that it's a bit like cheating to have a buffer board, buffer column, because it effectively avoids, is just a way to circumnavigate the rule of the work in progress limit.
I'm not quite sure I understood all that. It's something that you're fading in and out a little bit.
So it's around buffer columns on a board. So a column without a work in progress limit, and whether those are a valid option on a board, because it sort of feels like they are a bit like cheating, because you can use those to avoid exceeding a work in progress limit.
Oh, by having other, yeah, you don't want to do things to kind of get around the rules. In fact, the Kanban board is kind of an interesting thing. The Kanban board is not something you follow. The Kanban board should be a reflection of your workflow. In other words, the idea of this is a very solid, fundamental Lean principle. Lean suggests that you want to create visibility in how you're doing your work so everybody can talk about it. So you can say, look, this is how we think we should get our work done. And you put it on a board so everybody can see what's happening. So the board is a reflection of the work rules the team has come up with to get their work done. And it's on a board, so it's very visible. And even though the team is doing it, by being on the board, management can come by, and management can see a few things. One is they can see how the work is progressing, and they like to see how the work is progressing. They can also see if what the rules are. In other words, what is the basis on which the team is doing their work? And in fact, they can make suggestions or coach at that possibility. In fact, they can even see if their work rules are being violated by looking at the board, and if those violations are happening because of the team, or perhaps other managers are interrupting them, and then they can go tell those other managers to stop violating the team's rules and things like that. So what you want to look at is the board is a reflection of the work. Then what's the best way to limit our work in progress? And then do WIP limits according to the best way to do the work in progress. So you're not trying to get by the rules of the board. The board is a reflection of everybody's conversation about how to get stuff done. Now, does the board have to exactly reflect these agreements? And the answer is not really. You want it to be reasonably close, but software is kind of complicated. So there are times there will always be exceptions, and you just want to know what they are as a group. You don't necessarily need a different board or a different column for an exception. You just know these are exceptions. We're handling this in a special case, but at least somebody's talked about it. You're not just abdicating, you're not just saying, oh, well, this one, do whatever you want to. You're always trying to improve. You're always trying to do the thing in the best way you know how.
So would you say that having a sort of a buffer column would be a suitable option where there was a delay that was out of your control, like your dependency on?
Well, a buffer column. Well, I understand what you're saying. A buffer column is fine, but the buffer column should be part of the WIP limit. So, like if I got a buffer column before test, then I will consider, if I'm looking at how much I can put in there, I've got to look at that buffer column in test. Is that, do I want to add more? So do I want to do more work? So if I look at the process in front of it as a coder, and I see that there's a buffer column between me and test, and I got a huge amount of stuff in that buffer column, then I want to make sure I have a rule that tells me stop working, because I've already got too much work waiting behind me for test. So as long as you make the WIP limit such that it mirrors good decision making on what you could start or not start, then it's fine.